Hello and welcome to Can You Hear Me at the Back, the podcast about all things voice and communication. Hey Aundrea.
Hi Leon.
What are you eating?
A marshmallow.
Oh,
a giant marshmallow.
Giant marshmallow.
Leon had giant marshmallows.
They're amazing.
Oh, are they giant? No, they're mega. The box says mega.
Oh, yeah, mega. They are pretty mega.
I sound like a very American word, mega.
Yeah, I think they are American.
Like a Megatron. Well, maybe the only ones who would come with
I thought they were just like a normal size when I bought them. And then they turned up and I bought 2 packets of them.
Could you imagine eating hot chocolate?
Don't eat. Okay, after the podcast finished. Guys, get some marshmallows. Join in with us after you finish listening to the podcast. Put some hot chocolate on. Put a mega.
Wait, no, they shouldn't do it now.
No, don't do it now. Don't do it now. Keep listening. Aundrea, in a sound and a movement, with some marshmallows still in your mouth. How are you feeling today?
Yum. Somebody really hates me out there. So those people who just get like cringes when they hear people eat.
Yeah, my friend Dave.
Sorry, Dave.
And also my cousin Nikki.
Sorry.
My cousin Nikki doesn't like good. Well, she loves going to the cinema, but she likes watching movies.
Yeah.
Hates going to the cinema because people eat popcorn. She once accused me of having thin cheeks. And as you can see from my face, not a thing.
I'm also like, I don't know what to feel. I don't know if well, nobody would ever say that I had thin cheeks, but
yes, they would. Guys, write in. You know the PO box. Write in.
I don't think but when I was little, people used to like squeeze them.
Oh, you should chop your cheeks.
Yeah, I used to have really chubby cheeks, and I think I just subconsciously have taken that and put that apart as part of my identity now. But I don't know if that's a bad thing to have thin cheeks. But it's not a bad thing to have chubby cheeks. Your cheeks are your cheeks. Be your cheeks.
But my cousin was always like, "Well, I can hear you chew everything you chew through your cheek. You must have thin cheeks." I'm like,
oh, see, when you put the context on it, it makes a lot of sense then.
Maybe my head is very good at conducting sound.
My dad chews with his back molars, and you can hear them like clamping against each other when it's freaky.
So it's like clack 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 clack.
No, it's just like. But you can hear because he's got, yeah. We're freaking people out. You know those podcasts? You know they're like podcasts and YouTube channels just for people who eat. Like people just
ASMR.
Like was that what it's called?
I think
you
so.
just like eat like pickles and stuff into microphones.
Yeah, and then people get really close to the microphone and they do that. And it makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
I don't like it.
Do you know? Apparently some people don't feel it.
What? The hairs on the back of the neck?
Yeah. They don't get that response.
I don't get that. You have to physically be like behind me.
I got it already.
You have to physically be behind me in order for me to feel it. Or like anywhere near my ear. We're getting to weird and dangerous territories.
Yeah.
And a movement and a sound. How you feeling? I like that.
Think is the sugar.
He had like, how many of you? You had like 5.
I had 5, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I had 1, 2.
I had 2, and I was
think
buzzed off the first one.
No, I had 5. I had 5.
I was buzzed off the first one, and now I've got the second one. Who knows what this might be?
They're insane. Like. They actually are insane.
Plus, I think there's a vanilla coating on the front, on like a sugar coating before you get to the marshmallow.
They're good, aren't they?
Yeah. It's genius.
Guys, write in. I'll send you one in the post. I'm so not going to send you one in the post, but it'll be interesting to see if anyone tweets in. Josh Matheson, if you don't tweet in, I'm going to be really disappointed. And the same thing with Emily Moore. So, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about coaching and teaching.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So voice coaching and voice teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing I had is, what is the difference?
See, this is really interesting because I've had this conversation with lots of... I know. I've had this conversation with lots of coaches because they really view what they do differently to what teachers do.
Yeah.
And yet, the best teaching actually fits a coaching kind of context, paradigm. So, coaches talk about them not having to follow a curriculum and it's responsive to the needs of the individual. Whereas teaching follows the needs of a curriculum or a syllabus or whatever. And to some extent, it kind of changes according to the needs of the individual. But it's more about getting everybody to a certain point, or that person to a certain point. Whereas coaching is about finding out a way to get them there for them.
I was waiting
so it's
for you
bespoke. Does that make sense?
I was waiting for you to say it's about taking an individual to a certain point. I was like, he's gonna say the same thing.
It kind of is the same thing.
I think within teaching you can coach, and I think within coaching are teachable moments. I'm all about teachable moments, because if you stripped like teaching down to its basic kind of fundamentals, right? It's basically just giving people the tools to learn a new skill.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of times what coaching is. Except they might not be learning that skill as like a first time thing. It might not be the first time that they're doing it. It might be coming back to it from having been away from it for a long period of time. Or they might have just done it and they need to work with it in a different and new kind of a way. So I think the difference a lot, like in a kind of conventional way of speaking, is that coaches are doing something, but they tend to have people who are not starting brand new and right off. I mean, there are people who do that, but 9 times out of 10, you're working with somebody who's had some kind of experience with that on some level before.
So is it like you're adjusting the behaviours that have already been learnt for a given task?
Oh my god, we got so behavioralist.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, let me put my psychology hat on.
Versus teaching somebody the sort of building blocks of how to achieve something.
Yes. And I think within teaching, it is about the process, right? So it is about teaching students how to break things down so that they can recreate it themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think you have to do that in coaching, because I think in coaching it's just kind of like, here's what you need to do. Here's the point that we need to get to.
Yeah.
Do they need to know how they got there? Yeah. Like, I mean, sometimes people like it. Sometimes transparency is really good for working with somebody. But there's some people who are like, nah, I don't really care. Like, I just want to get to that
Some
point.
people don't care why it works. They just want to know that it does and just do it.
Yeah. Whereas I don't think that would go over very well in teaching. In fact, I don't like when students do that in teaching. I want them to they need to be curious about everything.
That's interesting. So it's actually more like a holistic thing. Like teaching is more about for you in this instance.
Yeah.
Is more about a kind of wider context. Whereas coaching is more focused. Is more sort of like narrow. Yeah.
And I think it's only because I've only coached like accents. I coached a tiny bit of voice, but I've only really coached accent. Whereas I've taught like English, I've taught voice, I've taught so I've taught in more holistic spaces and environments. And I've only coached really in one environment. Except in like my soccer league. But I didn't really coach for that long. I wasn't there that often.
Yeah, I like that. I'm trying to think of like how much so the vast majority of the teaching that I've done has kind of more been within a coaching context because it's been in higher education or it's been in vocational settings. So it's never been kind of like, there's always been a broad range of approaches that I've given people in order to be able to achieve a certain thing.
Right, yeah.
So it's not like, this is our starting point and this is our end point, you can only get there this way. I'm kind of like, well, differentiate, let's work out how you need to work, or let's work out how, do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of, it's a more responsive way of working. I've always kind of worked in that way. Versus actually kind of teaching in order to follow a curriculum. I find that kind of limiting, which is weird because it's sort of the opposite, which is so unusual for us to have the opposite opinion on something. But that I kind of feel like coaching's kind of more holistic,
Yeah.
and in a sense, because it's like there's a wider variety of context that I can draw on. Whereas a curriculum, I feel like I'm just like on some tracks, not a curriculum, but like a specific teaching thing. I'm like just kind of.
I just really like that you do the sound for the train tracks.
It's all about sound. You're an auditory learner. We talked about this already tonight.
Yes, I am an auditory learner. I think yes, but I think when I think about it, I'm using the word think a lot.
Was that when you thought about it just then? The little.
I just had a meta moment. I was like, I'm using the word think, stop using the word think, and then I said thought. Anyway, it's the marshmallows.
Stop talking about thinking about thinking.
Just be present. But stop thinking and be. When I coach something, it's for a performance normally.
Right.
And when I'm thinking about, like, I think by the time you get to me, normally, because most of the things that I've been coaching on, I'm not brought in, like, in the beginning, like, I'm not, you know.
Like in an ideal world where somebody budgeted for a voice coach one time.
No. I'm normally, like, it's normally like, oh, no, this person's about to lose their voice, could you help? And you're like, sure, yeah.
Sure. I'll wave this magic wand. Yeah.
Larynx be fixed. But... so you don't have a lot of time, but by the time you get to that point, you're not helping them discover a character. You're not helping them, you know what I mean? You're not helping them kind of find the sophistication in it. Yeah. You're literally just kind of
fixing that thing.
You're just there for that specific thing. Whereas in my experience of teaching, a lot of times I'm helping connect the dots of certain things. So I'm helping you realize that what you do in your voice class does impact what you do in your acting class, impacts what you do with your movement class, because it's all about becoming an actor and becoming that person, or in transformation and things like that. And how do we get to do that? And the vocal responsibility in that sense. And you have to kind of lead students into that. Whereas that's not my responsibility as a coach. Like, at all.
I have this thing with private coaching.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Or like private practice with seeing clients on a private basis, where I have to quite explicitly ask people, do you want me to teach you or do you want me to coach you?
Yeah.
And then I have to kind of explain the difference.
Yeah.
So some people come for coaching and then they change their mind. So they actually want teaching.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of my singers come to me shortly before an audition, usually because they've just found out that they've got an audition and they need a 32-bar cut of something that's not from the musical. And so then we work to be able to sort of accommodate that and what have you. So, and then I coach them how to fix the areas of the song that they're having the most difficulty with, or whatever, or any difficulty with, and do a few run-throughs and what have you. So that's kind of fine, but that's very much sort of just quick fix coaching. There's no time to teach somebody something about that. I can maybe teach them one little moment of within the coaching of how to make that particular section work better. But I'm not teaching them. There's no kind of like getting them from comfortably from one point to another. It's kind of getting them reactively from one point to another.
Right.
And then some people come wanting that initially, and then they come back a couple of weeks later and say, actually, I really need to just see you regularly for a few months just to really make sure that this thing, that reaction thing doesn't happen again.
Right.
So that I can really manage it. I know what to do.
Yeah.
I might not know what to do every time, so I'll still come and see you to be able to coach me on that specific piece of repertoire. But it's that moment that I don't want to repeat.
Yeah.
And then I go right back to kind of like, okay, here are the building blocks of how to put this thing together. These are the reasons why it works. This is kind of our current understanding of it. And then if you do this, this, and this, it then plugs into what we've already just done. And they go, oh, okay. So it feels to me like as you've said already, but like add more context to that particular moment that they didn't want initially, because they just wanted to be able to go, I just want to know one cue to make that work.
Yeah.
Then I can be in the audition, give myself the cue, do it, and then if I get the part, I'll come back and work on it. Or I didn't get the part, but I want to come back and work on it so that next time I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting that people kind of don't appreciate what the difference is, even though that's what they're coming to do.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they know.
No, that's, exactly.
And I think because I have a similar thing with accent, where it's like someone will get something and be like, okay, I need to read for this by tonight. Like, I need to put myself on tape for this in an accent. And normally I do that same thing, and I was like, yeah, sure.
You go listen to our previous episode.
Okay, fine. So then you give the fast acting thing. Do you make this sound? Do this, blah, blah, blah. Whereas, like, if you come to me for longer periods of time, it's not necessarily that you need to make this sound, but we go, what is the difference between the sound that you're currently making and the sound that you need to make, and how do we get there so that the next time you have to do it, you can listen to yourself and be like, oh, this is where I'm starting from. I know this because, my coach said this, this, and this. This is how I get to it because I've written it down. You should always write things down or have them in a voice memo. That's another episode. Still telling my students that. And I can refer to it later. And then that's how I do it. But I think, I don't know if people know the difference between that, because I think as voice coaches and voice teachers, I think we know the difference because we're doing something very different.
That's true.
But they see it as receiving information. And then there's this issue of autonomy, which I feel like comes up quite a bit in the voice world, right? Because I think ideally you would want your students to be autonomous so that they can start making safe and creative vocal choices, or accent choices, or whatever it is that you're teaching. But then when you're working through a progression of work, you can only be autonomous at a certain point, because otherwise it's the blind leading the blind. Like I've had classes where it's like, okay, we're going to split up into different groups, and I'm just going to give you this idea, and we're going to work with this idea, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose because they go, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to coach you on this, and then they become these weird, I don't want to say uneducated, but they're not educated in what they're supposed to be doing. So slightly not sophisticated teachers trying to replicate work that they don't really understand. And so in that case, they don't have autonomy of the work yet, but they're working to get there. And you can see there are clearly students who are like, I don't want that. I still want you to be my teacher. I want you to lead me through everything, and I want you to tell me when I'm doing things right and when I'm doing things wrong. And I do think that a coach does that. I think a coach, if you have the budget and if you are invited to rehearsal, I think a coach's job is to stand up and say, that's not the right vowel. That's the wrong vowel. You need to do this vowel. Or that's not the right intonation. It needs to be this intonation. Whereas a teacher is not necessarily going to go, that's wrong. They might go, oh, wait, think about that. Because it's then your responsibility to go, oh, it's not right. And then if you need help, I can tell you why it's not right.
That's really interesting as well. So whether the teacher takes responsibility, well, the teacher doesn't take responsibility, the teacher pushes the responsibility of the learning outcomes back onto the student.
Yeah.
Whereas the coach takes responsibility for the thing that's gone wrong in the room.
Yeah.
And calls it.
Yeah.
And makes it change.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting definition.
Yeah. I just made it up. Because I don't think I started with that. I think I started with something completely different. Because that's what I feel. I feel as though when I'm in a rehearsal space, I'm coaching the accent particularly. I was the one put in charge of the accent. So if something goes wrong, that's me.
Yeah.
Right. And nobody else is looking out for that. It's just kind of me. So yeah, in that case, that is my responsibility. Where if I'm if I'm in a room, and I'm teaching, say, an accent, and we're going through it, and I'm listening and they're listening, I don't always go. I don't always take responsibility for it because it's a learning environment, and so I'm teaching them how to listen, and I'm teaching them how to.
Yeah.
I'm essentially teaching them how to coach as well, because I'm teaching them how to give feedback if that's needed in that moment. To go, oh well, maybe it's not. Maybe your sound is a tiny bit off. And then if it is, if they've identified it correctly, then I will give the exercise that they need to do to fix it.
Yeah, that's always an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I find that lots of people, when they are invited to coach somebody else, but they don't know. So, like, if somebody's like a native speaker of a particular accent,
right,
and then somebody else is trying to do that accent, and they demonstrate, and they go, "This is the sound." They demonstrate the sound, and then somebody does the sound, but it's slightly off. Then they often won't break that down,
right,
and then isolate the vowel sound. What they'll do is
they'll put it in a different word a lot of times.
Or but sometimes they put it in a different word because it'll be a sound that might be in orthography written as an A,
right,
and then they'll be like, bath, and you're going, okay, bath, yeah, like bat, and you're like, no, it's a completely different vowel sound. They're like, no, because it's written with an A. You're like, oh my god, remember that first class where we talked about IPA and vowel sounds? And they're like, what?
All my first year syllabus.
Yeah. So like, there's that happens, but then there's also things that happen where people then, rather than it being like bat, no, let's say bag and bag.
Right.
Right. So like a Midlands would say a bag, and I'd say bag. So it's like a slightly longer vowel sound. And then what would happen is like the student listening to it would hear that something was not quite right, but then they'd be like, no, it's bag, and you're like, hold a second, you just made more of the b, like it's really odd, and then it's bag. You're like, well, it's not bag, is it? So they then put the emphasis on weird parts of the weird parts of the word that don't necessarily make any sense or actually move the person who's not making that sound on. So what they do is they end up doing that sort of very British thing and just sort of shouting at things
until they think it's correct.
Yeah, yes. And then they go, "Yeah, now you've got it." And you're like, "What?
So what changed?
What? Yeah."
Yeah. I tend to give them, if I'm doing accent with them, I tend to give them very specific things. So I'd say, you're in charge of E sound. That's all you're listening for is E sound.
Oh, nice.
And where the E sounds come from. And you might be charged of but and cut sounds. So you're just doing but and cut sounds. So that when the person's getting feedback, and I'll do the overall of everything and bring everything together, and then we'll do the exercises together. But if they are giving feedback, it is just about the X sound. So even if it's something that is not very helpful, which happens quite a lot, where it's like, oh, I feel like your tongue is just really, I don't know, twisted, and you just go, what? Because if it's something odd, the class will help, and they'll be like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Because I was like, well, twist your tongue. How does that help with your sound?
Yeah.
But that way, if they're feeding in, it's very specific. And then I can easily go, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
Or that's not, so I hear what you're hearing, but help.
But how can you explain it in a better way?
Yes, help this person get what you're saying. Is it a physical thing that they have to do? Is it a thing? Is it something with the muscle in the tongue? Is it something about placement? But I only do that for teaching. Right? Like that's a very teaching thing to do, because I'm teaching them how they learn and how they break down sounds, and how they negotiate those things with other people, how they communicate with other people, which tends to be at some level not very great, otherwise it wouldn't be in the class. But they're learning that. They're like, oh, well, that's not very helpful, and I shouldn't really be saying that. But then they're also they're learning about the key things. So they're learning, oh, so that sound I was listening for, that sound is really, really important, because when they mess it up there, the whole accent shifted. But I would never do that for coaching. That takes up way too much time.
Yeah, time-wise.
But
Yeah.
that's not the performer's responsibility. That's my responsibility to get them to say that F sound.
And yet, if somebody hasn't been through that process where they've been encouraged to listen,
right,
and repeat, and not just listen to it in themselves, but listen to it in others,
right,
like, I think often what's happening contemporarily is that actors think that training actors think that when we as voice teachers are asking them to observe something and are then inviting them to comment on it, that is because we want them to comment. And actually, we don't really want them to comment. What we really want them to do is observe, and articulate that is a thing. So if the F vowel is a little bit off, well, when you do an F vowel, is it a little bit off? Or is it right? And so when you do it yourself, can you identify those particular facets of the accent? Are you listening for a vowel sound, or do you get mixed up with what a vowel sound and prosody is? Do you get mixed up between what a vowel sound and prosody and a consonant is? And is it to do with the speed or the strength of the release, or is it to do with the proximity of the articulators and therefore the sort of brightness or darkness of the fricative? Or do you know what I mean? It's like, so what lots of people kind of don't then haven't been through that process of being taught how to listen,
right,
and so therefore they find it extremely difficult to be able to reproduce,
right,
and then it makes it much more difficult to coach them, because they have no context for being able to change something having heard something. So making the auditory and kinesthetic sort of a two-way street.
Right, yeah. And that's difficult. That is very difficult, I think. And it's something that takes quite a long time to develop, and it's constantly developing. I mean, I know there's certain things that I listen to that because there are different levels of listening, right? Because we can listen for the articulators, and we can listen for the vowels and the consonants, and then we can listen for the words and the meaning of the words. We can listen for the prosody of the whole thing. We can listen for the intonation of it. And there are lots of different ways of listening. And I think if you don't know what your go-to thing is, because I know people in my life, and I know students that I have who are just in love with intonation. And they'll be like, oh, that doesn't sound right. And it's like, no, but that's not a vowel thing. That's because you don't like when things drop at the end of a sentence. I think that's completely different. But if you don't know that, then you're not particularly aware of possibly when you go and perform that your default is to possibly rise at the end of a sentence because you like a word's intonation. And if you're not aware of that, when I come to you and I say try doing this, then that might take you aback a little bit. So it's all about knowing yourself in a weird way.
But also, often people, students, more than anyone, I think, well, not always, but students often don't know that there are so many facets.
Oh, yeah.
And so they kind of go, oh, yeah, I can do an accent. And you're like, well, you can do one. But there are like a plethora of accents. And
can you do it well?
And also, can you do that one well? Yeah. It's like, oh, I can do an American accent. You're like, firstly, which one? And secondly, what? And can you do it for more than just your favourite quote from Friends? Yeah. Like, it's, that sort of thing where you think, not going, how you doing? Is not doing a kind of, Italian, American, Brooklyn accent. It's not.
Can you sustain it?
No, can you sustain it to the end of a sentence, let alone to the end of a role, like to the end of a play? So, but it's what I find fascinating is the sort of you're right, the levels of listening and being able to not just identify which things those are, but then identify how to kind of tweak them. And I think in the early stages of learning something, we all kind of like, our knowledge goes from absolute zero to like through the roof and we think, oh yeah, I get this now, I really understand it, it's awesome, I'm brilliant at it. And then it's sort of, as you keep going along, you think, oh, actually, there might be more to this than I first thought. And so your confidence sort of drops in it.
Yeah.
And so there is this sort of upswing that happens after that where you think, yeah, fairly confident with it. I know I don't know everything about it, but I know enough to be able to get through. And then you can begin to sort of hone your skills thereafter. But I think you always stay in that kind of, yeah, I'm all right, but like I'm not, you know, not an expert, even though you're pretty expert in it by that stage.
Yeah.
So it's kind of there's a kind of interesting thing about teaching people to listen, as you've said, and also being able to listen ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is exhausting.
It really is.
And
You're right.
and that's something to do with
we work
like,
so hard. We're great people.
It has nothing to do with like coaching or teaching, because I think both are exhausting in their own kind of rights. But I was thinking about, you know, the amount of listening that you have to do as a voice coach is just like that.
But I've often had this conversation with students and said to them, you know, when assessing, I have to listen for prosodic issues, for vowel and consonant issues in terms of clarity of articulation and diction. I have to listen for the use of language, so whether you're using the keywords and operative language, whether you're acting and using those metaphors and similes and, you know, imagistic adjectival parts of the sentences. Like, are you actually communicating what the text is about and what the subtext is about, and also inhabiting in an imaginary world? And I'm like thinking and watching and doing and assessing all of those things. So even though you might sort of roll your eyes as one person after the next gets up to do their 2.5 minutes of a speech, every 2.5 minutes I'm listening for at least a dozen things. And then having to write some kind of salient comment about it so that you've got something to improve upon next time. And then they're like, oh, but I really don't understand this. Well, no, you don't understand that because I haven't fully explained it, because I didn't have time in the 2.5 minutes where you rushed through your speech that should have taken 3 minutes, or, you know. So I think it's really, it's a choice whether you're going to coach someone or teach someone. And I think it's also whether you're being asked to do that or not, and whether the responsibility is yours or the student's. And yeah, I think there are so many different ways of approaching the coaching, because you can approach it, well, you can approach it broadly, kinesthetically or auditorily or visually, but you can also approach it within those three things in a number of different ways. And then also within teaching, you can approach it from, I mean, I don't necessarily want to discuss learning theory, but, you know, like, there is like a plethora of learning theory that you can, yeah, I mean, Vygotsky is my man, do love a bit of
behavioralism.
Don't like behavioralism, but you know, like you can approach things in so many different ways, and you can work with people in a way that might suit them or not suit them, or be really quick and might really not. But it's kind of, sometimes people don't know that they want to be coached, and they don't know that they want to be taught. And sometimes we don't know if they want to be coached or they want to be taught. And sometimes even in a moment where you think you should be teaching, you are coaching. And in a moment where you're coaching, you're actually teaching. So there's this really sort of grey area between them where there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I think I coach in almost all of my classes at some point in time. I don't necessarily teach in all my coaching sessions, but I definitely coach at some point in all my teaching sessions.
I mean, I feel like that's what you've learned this episode.
That is.
It was beautifully put.
It was. I'm just gonna leave it like that. I don't want to mess it up. Leon, what have you discovered? Doing lots of hand gestures.
You touched your face a lot this episode.
I did. I don't know what is happening.
I don't know either. I was worried about you.
You know what I think
point.
it's the marshmallows, actually?
Oh my god, yeah. I feel like doing an episode really high on sugar. Not a great look. But also I think that like the difference between coaching and teaching is kind of, there is a grey area in between, but actually teaching is quite well defined and coaching is quite well defined.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know which one you're doing and you don't sort of try and as the coach you are responsive to whether or not somebody wants to be coached or taught in that moment, that then you can do the most appropriate thing for that person.
Right.
Rather than kind of going, no, I'm sorry, this is a class and you're going to have to be taught. Rather than being like, actually, this is a moment where I need to just shift you quickly so you can feel it, and then we can circle back and I can teach you what that means.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is about kind of combining those things and doing the most appropriate thing in that moment for that person.
Yeah. 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 I think it is quite a grey area. I like the way you said that. And I'm also like, we don't have time for this. I know I do this quite a lot. Because I'm thinking the difference between like when we talk about like sports coaching.
Oh yeah.
Because that's also another definition of coaching, and I wonder how, because when I think about, you have a coach on a professional athletic team, that to me is somebody who's a professional athlete being coached by someone. You know what I mean?
So much to say about that.
Okay. I think that's two.
Next episode. That's next episode.
We'll do part 2.
See you later. If you want to contact us about anything we said in the podcast, you can reach us on Twitter at CanYouHearPod,
or on Instagram at CanYouHearMePodcast.
or you can search for us on Facebook and on YouTube.
Or email us at CanYouHearMeAtTheBack@gmail.com.
You can find me, Leon, on Twitter at Leon Trayman.
Or me, Aundrea, at Aundrea Fudge on Twitter.
Please support the podcast by subscribing as a patron on our Patreon site.
The link is in the show notes.
To keep the podcast advertisement free, as well as get access to cool extra stuff, discounts, bonus episodes, as well as supporting ongoing voice research funding as well. Okay, love you, bye!